The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
It is 7 minutes after 8. Good morning once again. Welcome to the Forum at 8 here on SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. Already lots of SMSs, even emails this morning about our topic. Perhaps I should just start there, reading some of the SMSs that we already have. There's one from Spio in KZN, for instance, who says, this started, of course, referring to the topic, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it if you haven't heard in a second. He says, this started when untransformed courts were used to delegitimize our struggle. We not only were told that we don't own land, but we can't sing our songs as well. Another one unsigned. It says, Mulder has no claims in Africa. He can gladly trace his Dutch roots from Europe. In most democracies, he would have been made to resign. There are a couple more SMSs, but let me just read one email here as well. It says, I hope you will invite the first citizens as well. We always hear from those who arrived after them. It is interesting to note that most of the first citizens, Khoi and others, always refer to themselves according to their tribes and not as Africans. They do not use Africanness to lay claim here. Simply put, they were the first ones here and their voice should always be heard. That's Buitumelo Mokhale in Mafikeng. Another one says, borders of ancient Africa were very fluid because people were nomadic, roving all over in search of grazing land and good weather. So to suggest that any piece of unoccupied land did not belong to them is historically and politically incorrect. That's Ndoda Ngobo Endwedwe. Also, lots of Facebook messages. There's Martin Sain Condela who says, this shows you that there's deep racial divide. Mr. Mulder's utterances were malicious and were made to provoke black people. We do not want leaders like him in this new South Africa. He must resign. Anthony Vaughan says, I agree with Mulder. My ancestors roamed the Western Cape before anyone else came here. Yet we are not being recognized. Don't know what he meant otherwise. Debucho Mudise, I'm Tswana and I'm from the Northern Cape. He needs to do his homework first. It just shows how ignorant we are as white and black South Africans. Doesn't he ask himself why DA doesn't run Northern Cape? Majority is African people in that province. He better think again. Frank Harty, what was Mulder thinking? He must be tired of his lucrative position as the deputy minister. Here's a politician who visibly has made one solitary speech during his almost 3 years as a cabinet minister, and it is almost certainly his farewell speech. Those are lots coming through, and please do send me more emails at gwalax@sabc.co.za, alive at sabc.co.za as well. Send us SMSs at 34701, and I'll be taking calls much later on 0891104208. But let me introduce the subject. Then the Young Communist League yesterday saying that it wants Deputy Agriculture Minister Peter Mulder to resign or be fired. This after Mulder said in Parliament last week that Bantu-speaking people had no historical claim to 40% of this country. He said there was proof that there were no Bantu-speaking people in the Western and Northern Cape. He called into question land redistribution targets. On the forum, then, we examine Mr. Mulder's statements and also get reaction to it. Let me then welcome guests on the show this morning. We are joined by Dr. Corné Mulder, his chief whip of the Freedom Front Plus. A very good morning to you, Dr. Mulder. Are you there for me, Dr. Mulder?
Yes, I'm here.
Thanks indeed. I'll come to you in a second. But also in our Pretoria studios, we're joined by Steve Libello. He is with the South African History Online. Steve, good morning to you.
Hi, good morning, Xolani.
Thanks for your time.
And good morning to the listeners.
Cheers. Thanks indeed. Christy van der Westhuizen, a political columnist and author of White Power and the Rise and Fall of the National Party. Christy, good morning.
Good morning, Xolani.
Thank you for your time. Dr. Mulder, let me start with you. Of course, you're going to get these questions. People are going to say, where's Peter Mulder today? Do you know where he is?
Of course I know where he is. He's busy with his official duties. There's a policy conference of the department, not the department, but of Agri SA in Stellenbosch that started at 8 o'clock this morning, and he's attending that. He's doing his job.
All right. There are calls for him to resign. Do you know what his thinking is around those calls?
There's no reason why he should resign at all. Maybe we should start at the beginning. When President Zuma came to power in 2009, he extended an invitation to him to join the executive as a deputy minister. Now, at that stage, you'll remember that agriculture and land reform was basically the same department. We made it clear to the president that we have strong views with regard to land reform and that we are not going to serve in that capacity. And consequent to that, the two departments were basically split. We've now got a different department. The Department of Agriculture is one section dealing basically with food security and the whole question of farmers, and then a different department dealing with land reform. So he's serving as the Deputy Minister of Agriculture, and he's not dealing with land reform in that capacity. So with regard to the call from the Communist youth league or whatever for him to resign. There's no reason for him to do so. He's serving in the executive on the invitation of the president. If the president doesn't want that to be the case, then the president should withdraw his invitation.
But the president, of course, warned Dr. Mulder last week about his utterances on this, which obviously implies that the president does not approve of his comments on this matter.
Well, maybe a debate like this morning is absolutely necessary, and maybe another debate in Parliament is even more necessary, so that we can go back to exactly what was said, and that we can take the emotions out of this and come to what exactly was said, not what people think.
Okay, tell us what was said and why.
Well, the fact of the matter is that the President in his State of the Nation address basically referred to the question of land distribution and land reform, and he made the statement that the concept of willing buyer, willing seller is not a successful concept.
Yeah.
Now, that has huge implications for land, and if we say that land is an emotive issue, it's emotive for all South Africans, not for one section of the population.
And let's be clear, it wasn't the first time the President said that. He said it in 2009.
Yes, but he said this now in his State of the Nation address,
Sure.
and we all know that the ANC is on its way to its policy conference in the middle of this year, so we know where we are going. Then the President also said basically that he gave certain percentages. He said that 87% of the land belongs to whites, which we dispute. It's not correct. And he said only 8% of land has so far been successfully distributed or registered to the black population, figures that we do not agree with. And then basically, Peter Mulder in his speech basically referred to those figures, and he said that he disagrees with those figures and he thinks they are wrong, and if the department takes that as a point of departure, they're setting themselves up to fail even before they start. And then he took a historical perspective by saying how things developed in South Africa, and unlike as being reported all the time, he never said, not for 1 second said, that certain areas of South Africa were inhabited before the white people came here. He never said that. So we can go into those details as well.
No, just clarify for us. What did he say then? Around the Bantus and the 40% that they are not.
He didn't refer to the Bantus. I know that is also being said. He referred to an academically linguistic used phrase.
Bantu-speaking people.
Bantu languages.
Yeah.
And that is an academic term for people who moved from Central Africa down south. That's it. And we can talk about that as well. And he basically said, and I can quote exactly what he basically said. Let me just get that exact part.
Yeah, please.
Give me 1 second. I'll find that.
Mm-hmm.
He said, Africans in particular, and he referred to the ANC's kind of definition that they use. They talk about black people in general and Africans in particular when it suits them. He said Africans in particular never in the past lived in the whole of South Africa, and that is what is being claimed, but he said never lived in the whole of South Africa. The Bantu-speaking people, referring to that academic term, moved from the equator down, while the white people moved from the Cape up to meet each other at the Kei River. There is sufficient proof that there were no Bantu-speaking people in the Western Cape and Northwestern Cape.
Yeah.
And then he said these parts form 40% of South Africa's land surface. That's what he said.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I don't see any contradiction with what's being reported, because people are saying, well, he said there's proof that no Bantu-speaking people occupied the Western and the Northern Cape.
Yes, because it was occupied by the Khoi and the San at that stage.
And then he says that the Bantu-speaking people then have no claim in about 40% of the country.
No, he did not say that.
But by implication.
No, no, by implication. He did not say that. We should stick to what was said in this debate.
The Western, all right. The Western and the Northern Cape constitute about how much of South Africa?
40%.
Yeah, so what it means is that 40% was never occupied by the Bantu-speaking people.
Well, if that's let's look into it. Do you think there's a possibility that it might be true?
Tell me, is it true?
Well, the history book says it's true.
Whose history book?
Oh, well, now this is another debate. We can go about that. You bring your books, I'll bring my books.
No, but I mean, tell me whose history book are you referring to?
We look at the reality of South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Why even today does the brown community, or the descendants of the Khoi and the San people, form a majority in the Western Cape and the Northwestern Cape? Why would that be the case? That's it. We can go into that kind of historical argument. The fact of the matter is, he would never say that South Africa was unoccupied for 40%. He reacted to the claim and the definition used by the ANC when they talk about blacks and Africans in particular, and he used their own definition to say, but for 40% of the land in South Africa, they were not residing there.
All right, let me bring my other guest then. Christy, what did you make of the speech? And obviously what you're hearing, because I don't see any difference between what has been reported over the past couple of days and what exactly Dr. Mulder is saying now.
No, I'm also not noticing any particular difference. What I think for me is of significance here is why this is being brought up right now. Because the fact of the matter is what I'm noticing here is something that fits into a pattern that we've seen since 1994, which is where white people, through what we call white denialism, try to actually deny certain aspects of current levels of privilege. This is not for me actually so much about the historical aspect. History can be used and abused, in whichever way one wants to, ultimately. The question is why now, at this juncture, 18 years into democracy, are we hearing this argument being made? And I think it's actually part of it's a strategy to try and delegitimize black people's claim on the one hand, and to re-legitimize white people's claim on current levels of privilege that are held by white people. So we're seeing actually use of history to again create a kind of hierarchy of access. Because say for argument's sake, we can prove that there weren't a single black person in what's today the Western Cape and the Northern Cape 100 years ago, which I think is unlikely. But say we can prove that. What does that mean, basically? That means that we get back into those very same arguments that we used in the colonial and the apartheid era, of where there's a hierarchy of access that's being established. So we'll have to split the country into two, and we'll have to say, so-called coloured people and white people now have, can have land in the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape, and then I assume that the Freedom Front Plus then suggests that white people who own land in the rest of the country should let go of that land. I don't know, but it'd be interesting to hear what their suggestion is there. So one gets into the absurdity of that. So for me, it's actually not about the practical implications of what's being said, because it's ridiculous. It's actually more about trying to create a legitimization of white people's claims as they exist. What I would rather see is a situation where we say that what we have in this country is a situation of successive waves of immigrants arriving here throughout the centuries. And the first people from the rest of the continent, not from Europe, but from the rest of the African continent that arrived here, for example, was in the 4th century AD. So not quite, the Freedom Front Plus would want it. So from that point onwards, we see successive waves of immigrants arriving here. And I would say everybody who lives in this country today have an equal claim and stake. But as we know, colonialism and apartheid have denied black people their equal claim and stake, and in this country. And today we need corrective action, and that is what land redistribution and restitution is about. And I'd like to hear whether the Freedom Front Plus's position is that nothing should be done about the injustices that were wrought by apartheid and colonialism.
All right, let's get a response then from Dr. Mulder.
Yes, Christie is making all kinds of accusations and putting words in the mouth of Freedom Front Plus, which is absolutely nonsense. The fact of the matter is that we understand the reality of South Africa. The point that was made was basically to say it's not that simple. When you come to land distribution and land reform, there are certain basic realities. First of all, we need food security in this country. We need commercial farmers, black and white, who are productively farming and producing food for the population of this country. We need that. So whatever we do in terms of distribution of land, we need to take that into consideration and do not infringe on that reality. That's the first
Yeah,
part.
but I mean, there's nothing new in that, and I think that's what's been happening all along. Otherwise, it would have been reckless.
It's a huge problem. 9 out of 10 farms, commercial farms that have been given to black farmers have failed, and that's not our figures. That's the figures of the Minister of Land Distribution. That's the reality. So there's a huge problem. 30% of productive agricultural commercial land that has what was productive in the past has now become completely unproductive.
All right, fine. I think we digress.
So that's the reality. We need
We'll talk about that reality, but let's not digress. Let's talk about this utterance in Parliament, because some people may say the Freedom Front Plus is raising a bogus historical argument simply so that we can all talk about something that in the end will delegitimize the claims to the land, black people's claim in the land. So it's a bogus argument that seeks nothing else but our attention, and you're getting us now discussing this thing, which actually does not exist.
No, the Freedom Front Plus is not interested in bogus arguments. We are interested if we discuss things, if we have to talk about the reality of land distribution, and the President has called for a national debate on this issue, then we should put all the facts on the table and we should move away from emotional outbursts and slogans and those kind of things. And that is exactly what we basically
But please respond then to what Christy is saying, because she sees this as a way of delegitimizing black people's claims.
I disagree with that. We are not trying to do that. We are just putting the facts on the table.
But if your facts were the facts, then black people shouldn't make any land claims in the Western Cape and the Northern Cape.
That's not the point that we are making.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that ultimately, logic says if what you are saying is a fact, then black people must never have any claims in the Western Cape and in the North. How can they claim something that never originally belonged to them?
That's not what we are saying. It depends.
I know it's not what you're saying.
Could I answer the question?
Yeah, okay, go ahead. All right,
do you want to talk or should I talk?
No, but I mean, I'm just asking you questions. Go ahead.
If you ask me a question, then you should stop talking, then I'll try to answer. If you
That's what you want.
That's what you
want. That's exactly the point. You're raising this thing because you want everyone to stop talking, that you be the ones that are talking, and raising these bogus arguments so that everyone can follow exactly what you want.
Okay, so you're the guest, I'll be listening. You go ahead.
Let me get my other guests. I've got a lot of guests here.
Steve, but if you ask me a question, you should give me an answer.
Okay, go ahead. Answer then. Answer my question then.
Repeat your question. What do you want to ask?
That's the problem. I've been asking so many questions and you have not been listening. But I'm saying, here's what Christy is saying. She is saying that ultimately what you want here is to delegitimize black people's claims. Answer the question.
It's not true. So that's my answer. That's not what we are doing. That's exactly not what we are doing.
What are you doing?
We are putting certain historical facts on the table. It's not correct for the ANC to claim that Africans in particular have a claim to the whole of South Africa, as if other communities and peoples do not have also land claims, legitimate claims to South Africa. That's what we're putting on the table.
All right, let me get Steve. Steve, what is your take on this matter?
Thanks, Xolani, for the opportunity. I think when I was actually first told about this debate, my sense was that we were going to debate the historical validity of the claim that was made by Mulder in Parliament last week. And I think the public's reaction is actually based on and is a true reflection of what the statement actually implied. And this has been an age-old kind of, Africana argument about, probably justifying a series of political scenarios in South Africa, historically. And I think the latest would be to justify the creation of homelands. The same argument had actually been used. And it is no surprise today that the Freedom Front would still be using the argument that 40% of the Western Cape and Northern Cape were not populated by, Bantu or African, whatever term we want to use. But I think we are missing the point here. Yeah. And the point is that, there has been interaction between different people historically. There has been interaction between the Khoi and the San. Interaction which at some point, would have taken away any differences between the two. And hence we could actually talk at some point, at the height of this interaction, as the San being Khoi without cattle and Khoi being San with cattle. And the same kind of interaction would have happened between the Gunukwebe Xhosa and the Khoi. And that kind of interaction simply reflects the level of the capacity for absorption that the Khoi and the Xhosa would have had. So it becomes actually irrelevant that we must be talking about who between the Khoi and the Xhosa populated the Western Cape and the Northern Cape. Because you are talking about societies that had a high degree of capacity for absorbing each other's cultures and probably undermining certain identities that wouldn't help, kind of cooperation between the two. Yeah. This has not been the case with European settlers. 300 years down the line, whites are whites and blacks are blacks. You can never say, blacks are whites without money or whites are blacks with money, because it essentially doesn't happen. Those kinds of barriers never actually get broken down. So my sense here is that it's pointless to try and make a distinction between the Khoi, San, and the Xhosa, for purposes of this debate, because we are talking about, people who over time have actually created a particular kind of culture, that makes them survive. Interaction between the Khoi, San, and the Europeans is well known. Probably, some of it actually ended with a couple of smallpox epidemics for the Khoi.
Okay.
And almost, total annihilation of the Khoi and Cyanese people. Now, that's not the sort of thing that, Africans would do when they interact with people. And I think it's a kind of projected psychology, on the part of the Freedom Front, that Bantus should have done to the Khoisan what they did, at the point of interaction. And this is another thing that we probably have to debate.
Oh, let me get Dr. Mulder to respond. Let's give Dr. Mulder a chance to respond to that history.
I hear what Stephen is saying, basically, and I don't disagree with him, except for the fact, of course, certain things happened when certain white settler farmers, right at the beginning, moved into contact with the Khoi and the San.
Yeah.
But exactly the same thing happened from black communities who moved down to the north. It's not only one-sided situation, but it's interesting, when we talk about the Khoi and the San, and as Stephen is doing so, he says, well, it's not really any important difference between these two communities, and that's why we shouldn't take it any further. When you come to government policy, and you look at, for example, what the Department of Correctional Services is doing in terms of appointments in the Western Cape at the moment, there's a huge distinction now, and brown people are not allowed to be promoted. So when it suits the ANC on one side, then there's no difference, and it belongs to all in a certain sense. But on the other hand, differences are being made when you come to affirmative action and those kind of things. The fact of the matter is, yes, we must look at the whole question of land distribution. And the important thing is the fact, what do we do if the president says that only 8% of the land has been transferred so far? And we think those figures are wrong. And it's no use, as far as we are concerned, if we put up certain figures and we try to attain certain targets, if our point of departure is wrong and we're not going to...
Let me ask you, Dr. Mulder, what are your figures of what has been transferred so far?
Well, the fact of the matter is, the first problem is there's no general land audit of who owns what in South Africa at the moment. And we've been asking that from the department for quite some time. We think it's rather important that we exactly know who owns what in South Africa. There's no land audit. So if the president talks about 8%, there are a number of different issues that we need to deal with. For example, the Minister of Land Reform accepts this reality, and in an answer in Parliament, he gave us the figure that between 25 to 28% of land in this country belongs to the state, state-owned land. Now, where do we put that in? Is state-owned land neutral land? Is it white land? Is it being added to the 87% that the president claims to belong to the whites? Do we add that to black land? What do we do with that? What about the 2.8 million hectares belonging to the Nkonyama Trust in KwaZulu-Natal? Where does that fit in? What about the land, traditional land?
Christy, let me get your comment before I take the news headlines.
Yeah. Look, this whole notion of even, for example, referring to state-owned land, like saying, so whose land is that? I don't know, black land, is that white land? That is exactly the kind of thinking that we come from. That's apartheid thinking, that's colonial thinking, and our challenge is to actually think ourselves beyond it. To actually get to a situation where we're actually thinking of ourselves collectively as South Africans. So state-owned land obviously belongs to the people of South Africa. That should be obvious. I mean, I can't believe it. I'm actually listening to a politician asking whether that land would be black or white or et cetera, et cetera.
Can I respond to what Christy is saying?
Very quickly.
Yes. The fact of the matter is I'm putting that on in terms of the percentages being used by government. I'm not saying that it should be black or white land, but we must accept the fact 25% of land falls in that category. Where do we put that? We put that separately, and then we talk about
that land belongs to the people of South Africa.
That's
fine. That's a ridiculous notion to suggest that it could be black or white land.
Yeah, well, that's fine. But then we need assurance from government that 25% is not part of the calculation being used by government so that we can deal with the exact facts on the table. That's what we are saying.
All right. Let me just ask everybody to hold your thought. For now, though, we're taking calls, emails, and SMSs on our issue of the day. We obviously are referring to the utterances made last week by Deputy Minister of Agriculture, Dr. Mulder, and we're taking your thoughts on it. Let me go straight to the lines now. A lot of people have been holding for a while. Andile in Johannesburg, you first. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Colin, and your listeners.
Hi.
For me, really, I'm surprised that we as South Africans, 18 years into democracy, we are allowing this sort of racist discourse to continue. Serious nations, for instance, will not allow denialism of the Holocaust. That will be a criminal offense. But here we're sitting with people who are insulting black people in parliament, in the media, denying the very brutal history that we have had. So I asked the question, really, maybe that's where I should end. Why would the ANC appoint Peter Mulder, who Peter Mulder is known as consistent defender of the racist slave arrangement on farms. Now he is a deputy minister in agriculture. The ANC says it's one transformation. Mulder is clear he doesn't want transformation. What is going on here? I don't blame him. We know he's racist. We know he's past. But I blame those who appoint him to become the minister in a government that claims to want transformation.
All right, I'm going to ask, of course, Dr. Mulder to respond to the allegations you're making here, Andile. But let me take the ANC Secretary General who has called, Mr. Gwede Mantashe. Good morning to you, Mr. Mantashe.
Hello, Xolani.
Hi, welcome. Thanks for your call.
No. I just wanted to clarify one thing.
Yeah.
Dr. Mulder is appointing himself as spokesperson of the ANC on ANC policies, which he doesn't understand. He doesn't bother reading them. The definition of an African in the ANC must go to the strategy and tactics of the ANC, go to the glossaries, Dr. Mulder. It will tell you that it is the indigenous people of South Africa. And it lists them: Zulu, Xhosa, Venda, Tswana, Basotho, Khoi, and San. Now, the reason that Dr. Mulder want to say there were no people in the Western Cape and in the west of the Northern Cape is because he makes the genocide after the First War of Resistance in 1659 a reality that nation is extinct. But the Khoi and San are there. They are Africans in particular, and they are a majority in those provinces. So I don't know what is the argument that Mulder is trying to make when he doesn't understand the policy.
All right,
Mr. Mantashe?
All right, Mr. Mantashe, thank you very much. Yes,
no, Mr. Mantashe should stay on the line.
Oh, okay. All right, Mr. Mantashe, I think there's a question for you from Dr. Mulder. Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Mantashe?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mantashe, with all due respect, maybe you should make exactly sure what Dr. Mulder said before you made the utterances on the West Coast this weekend by saying that he's lying through his teeth. He never said what you are saying he said. He never said that there were no inhabitants in the Western Cape or the Northwest Cape. He never said that, as you are alleging.
What did he say? Said there are no Bantu-speaking people.
Dr. Mulder, answer, please.
Mr. Mantashe, the point that...
And he said there was no Bantu-speaking people. In his mind, he believes that Khoi and San are what they coined under apartheid, colored. And there's no Khoi and San in his mind.
No, that's
who
not
are
true.
Africans in particular.
No, that is not true, Mr. Mantashe. But you know, why is it that 1,850 of the descendants of these same communities have to be forced out of correctional services in the Western Cape to make place for blacks? Why is that?
No, that is a case on its own, which if it is true and factual.
It is true.
It is a wrong.
Well, that's the fact. It's happening at the moment. Go and ask the Minister of Correctional Services.
Hold on, Dr. Mulder. I've been listening to you in the radio. You have no skill of listening. You just speak and speak and speak all the time. Listen. The point I'm making is Khoi and San are Africans in our definition as the ANC. So don't say when you talk about Africans in particular, exclude Khoi and San. Because if you do that, you are manufacturing our policies in your own spectacle.
Right, Dr. Mulder?
I hear what Mr. Mantashe is basically saying. I think we need a discussion in this regard to see what exactly the facts are on the table. We are not talking about different things. I don't think that we agree.
Mr. Mantashe, let me thank you, by the way. Thanks indeed for
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the call.
I just wanted to clarify that because I think Dr. Mulder is having a particular racist spectacle on this matter, and he needs help. Okay.
All right.
Xolani, can I also
yes, Christy. Go ahead, Christy.
Address what the SG of the ANC was saying?
Yes, please.
Basically, I'm a bit perturbed. The thing is, in South Africa, it's a total minefield, all these different categories. And the reason why it's a minefield is, of course, because of the categorizations of the past that we've inherited from colonialism and apartheid. So now we're trying to forge a new country, and unfortunately, a lot of the material that we have to work with is the material from our past. But the thing for me is that I would like to see us moving to a situation where we say all the people who are living on this continent are Africans. And I would also, I'm interested to see how the Khoisan are now included into as part of Africans by Mr. Mantashe. While I'm curious to know how he sort of fits in the fact that many descendants of slaves are now among what is called the so-called coloured community. So it's not just Khoi and San. They're actually also, many of them are actually descending from the slaves. And that's also a part of our history that we don't really talk about. So I really stick to my argument that we are in South Africa are basically successive waves of immigrants that have arrived here. And we are now all here, and let's look at what we are doing now together to make this country work for all of the people that actually live in it, rather than rely on spurious historical arguments.
All right, I'm going to ask
Steve,
I wanted to get your point as well.
Yeah,
Steve?
maybe just to make the point again. I think part of what we are missing here is that, the kind of interaction that happened between the Khoi and the Xhosa, happened over an extended period of time. And like I said earlier, whatever identities that may have made them distinct, at some point would have fallen away. And that in itself, makes the whole argument about any distinction between the Khoi and the Xhosa, for purposes of this discussion, completely irrelevant. I don't think we should even be considering, any suggestion that there were no Bantu-speaking people in the Western Cape and in the Northwestern Cape. I think, just understanding the nature of society that emerged out of that interaction would certainly settle the debate. But I think, part of the debate here is about the government's program in terms of, land restitution and land redistribution.
Yeah.
And a point was made earlier about the fact that, and this point was also made, in the Sunday newspapers, about the fact that there is no inclination in black people, to actually be, utilizing the land for agricultural purposes. And I was actually hoping that at some point you would be able to get to that.
Okay.
Because for me...
We will. But, I would like us just to see if we can conclude that discussion about the Khoi and the San and whether or not they are Bantu speaking. Dr. Mulder, having heard then what the SG of the ANC had to say, also what Christy and Steve are saying, are you convinced that perhaps your history and your take of who the Khoi and the San may have been may be wrong?
No, I'm not convinced at all. And that is not... Let me answer this quickly. I want to go back to what Christy basically said just now, and I agree 100% with what she said basically. We should look at the facts, and then we should try to find a common South Africa in terms of which we can move forward. And in land reform and distribution is very important, that Rio. Let me come back to the Khoi and the San, and I hear what Stephen is basically saying. Maybe we should get someone from the Khoi and the San people on a show like this and ask them, how do they see themselves as a community?
Yeah, but you see now, that's moving away from your initial argument about what the ANC says.
No, I'm not. I'm not. Historically, in terms of, and you can go and have a look at what was said in terms of the Bantu languages as a group. The Khoi and the San is not part of that group of languages. The argument that was used in Parliament was to say that Bantu languages speaking people moved down to the south. Of course, the Khoi and the San were already present at that stage. They were present in the whole of South Africa at that stage. So that's the reality.
So what it means is that...
for the ANC, for argument's sake, to come and say, but in terms of our little definition, we quickly say the Khoi and the San is part of our perception. They may say that is so, but is that historically so? Let's ask the Khoi and the San themselves.
But is that what influences the ANC policy? I think is the key here, because the argument is starting on the basis of what the ANC is saying.
I think it does. For the ANC's purposes, and we heard what Mr. Mantashe just now said, he now says in terms of their definition, the Khoi and the San, they expect, or they seem to be, as far as they are concerned, part of the Bantu languages group. Let's ask the Khoi and the San if that's the case.
Okay, let's take some more calls, find out what people think. Is it Dwayne in Cape Town? Hello? Dwayne?
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Hello, it's Brian.
Hi. Go ahead, please.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call. Very interesting debate. I think one or two things that I wanted to say have been covered, but my main point is that I think neither the Mulder brothers nor the Freedom Front to present themselves as spokesperson for either colored people or for the Khoi or San. And I think the debate that has been started by themselves present a very serious, disturbing trend, and that is where or when do you start looking at history and which facts do you recognize? If you're going to recognize certain facts about where people were and where they were not and how and where they were migrating, you also need to recognize that white people are settlers in this country and there were land dispossession. And the whole question of land reform is to address the perpetration of gross deeds of injustices to indigenous people in this country. So we must be very careful with the arguments that they're presenting, because by definition and extrapolation, whites would have no right to land in this country.
All right, Brian, Dr. Mulder is going to respond to you, and also I'll hear from my guest in a second. Yes. Thanks for your call, though. Before you respond, Dr. Mulder, let me take Opperman in George. Opperman, good morning.
Good morning, Xolani.
Hi, welcome, Opperman.
Hi, I've been listening to your discussion, and I would not like to agree with Freedom Front, but I would like to say that we should look at the facts.
Yeah.
And the facts as been stated. And also I think we should look at the archives, history archives and stuff like that, to determine the land ownership and the land that was taken from the indigenous people. So we shouldn't discard everything that Mr. Mulder said, but we should look at the facts, and we should make a decision on that.
So
that's all. Thank you.
Okay, Opperman, what you're saying in what he's saying, let's take the facts out, and then of course look at the archives as well and mix it with other facts somewhere else. Opperman and George, I thank you for your call. Let me go to Xolani in Port Elizabeth. Xolani, good morning.
Good morning, Xolani. A quick one, man.
Yeah.
I hope I won't be emotional because the debate tends to be very emotional. I'm emotional as well. But I think the point that Dr. Mulder misses, and I think it's deliberate on his part, is that black people historically were taken land by white people, and white people not coming from South Africa. That's the historical fact. And the point that we are at now, it is what is the fact that people were denied access to land and production to land. What do we do about it? And I think I will imagine that Dr. Mulder, when he took podium in Parliament, wherever he is, he will talk about that instead of rewriting history to suit Afrikaners and resist land distribution to the rightful owners of these people. And I think it calls upon to the ANC, and I was just interested to listen to the SG. How are they intending to accelerate the program of taking land back to the people? It is pathetic. Africans are crammed in corners in the township. We can't produce food, we can't build houses, and bulk of the land is in the hands of white people. And Dr. Mulder must be very careful, must not invite civil war in this country, because in a manner in which he articulates his views, it leads us to that point. Thank you very much.
Command is in Port Elizabeth. Peter is in Grahamstown. Hello, Peter.
Thanks very much, Xolani. I'll be very brief.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to put the request to you because I'm speaking to you on SAFM, and it gets very emotional, and this is typical of SAFM. The point is, what is most important to us? To look at who owned the land before, a couple of 100 years ago, or to look at food security. Now, South Africa is a very poor country, and the fact is that SAFM doesn't have a single farming program, whereas RSG has 2 farming programs. Now, the use of land is of extreme importance, and I'm prepared to speak on this radio about what has happened to me. I've actually lost my best farm, where I had 4 tractors going, and I've got virtually nothing now, but we still produce a surplus of milk to the tune in 2010, and I can give you the documents. We gave 124,000 rands worth of milk to the Grahamstown Feeding Association, which feeds the indigent people in the township. Now, what is being discussed here raises emotions. It doesn't get us anywhere. And what has got to be viewed is the farmers. You've got to create the 3 C's. You've got to cultivate committed, competent farmers and take this emotion out of it, this racial issue out of it, because farmers are basically suckers. South Africa is not a good country to farm. You can ask Dr. Mulder that. He's in agriculture. He shouldn't really be in politics, because agriculture shouldn't be mixed with politics, but basically it is. And it suits the ANC to raise emotions because it becomes an easy political football. But the fact is, this station does absolutely nothing but raise emotions. And I'd like you to get back to me on this, and let's get back to the actual use of ground. And when I give my phone number, which I can do now, black people phone me and they want advice. Largely black people phone me, so there's an urgent need for farming discussion on land.
All right, because what I wanted to do was to just put you back to the producer so that you can give the number then, Peter, and we'll follow up things with you. I'm going to ask my guest then to hold the line just a little.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
All right, let me read some emails. Lots have come through, and I'll try and just be as brief as possible. Costi, for instance, says, this chap in the studio is waffling and not assisting the program. In fact, these people just don't respect us. They did it during apartheid, and they're still doing it in the democracy. So when is this going to end? That's according to Costi. There's also another email that says, it comes from Klo. It says, Mulder is not talking the truth when he said Cape Provinces is not black. The main thing it is 60% is white because Jan van Riebeeck arrived there in 1856. That's why there's too much whites there. It means if I find an empty space, it means there is no one who owns the land. That email coming through from Klo. Another email comes from Sig in Randburg. It says, Mr. Mulder was speaking after much unchallenged, threatening propaganda that whites are thieves who must be dispossessed without compensation. Should he have remained silent after the president reaffirmed the threat by stating in his State of the Nation address that there is general agreement that the willing buyer, willing seller option has not been the best way to address this question? That's a question coming through from Sig in Randburg. Another email says, it is clear that some people, or rather some white people, have not moved forward in terms of reconciliation. For the fact that he is even saying this in public, it shows he has no peace at all in his heart. The same applies to companies we're working for in this country. We are being treated as dogs, and this guy must not be defensive and face the reality. That email, it's a very long email from Sizwe. Another one from S. Butelezi. Peter Mulder is gambling with a very sensitive matter. Can you please tell him not to antagonize black people? Let him not open yesterday's wounds. I wonder why he's still a member of parliament after such utterances. He knows very well that our history is not written down because it was not in our culture to write things down. Rather, our history is cascaded from one generation to another. That's S. Butelezi Mtata. There is another email. It says, in Zululand, you drive plus minus 15 kilometers along the N2 side by side. I have no idea how many kilometers in width, and these farms are owned by one individual. What is government doing about that? That email comes through from Olo Pizzo. There is another one. Sir, I consider myself, from Kazisa. It says, Sir, I consider myself to be an average South African and try, like the rest, to cooperate with the inevitable transformation in our country. But your guy is simply weak. I can't believe there's a white guy who wishes to think South African blacks are not South Africans. It literally turned my stomach. I hope these people understand the damage done by racial segregation to the different peoples of South Africa, especially those whom were subjects, and should they enjoy the eternal privilege that apartheid caused them to inherit. Apartheid dehumanized blacks. Thanks, but I'm really sick. That's Khazisa. Perhaps the last one, this Mulder is not telling us what we should be hearing. The email is not clear. It's written on the language. It's a bit difficult to read. Anyway, let me just get my guest to respond here. Maybe let me take let me get responses, then I'll take SMSs because as well I'm inundated. Dr. Mulder?
Yes, Xolani, it's obviously not possible to react to everything that has been said. Sure.
I just want your general, because the reality is that out of these emails, it's becoming very emotive, and perhaps we need to deal with that.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we were trying to do in the speech, to try to get away from emotions and to try to get away from emotive slogans. It's no use to say that whites have no claim to any land in South Africa. Like Brian basically said, that would mean no white Americans have any claim to any land in America, or Australians in Australia. That's not how life works. Obviously, in South Africa, we have different communities. All have claims to land, and we need to address that in an absolutely responsible manner in the best interest of South Africa. That's what we are trying to do, and we've got no problem with that. I can assure you, if people know perhaps more about Freedom Front Plus or our policy and our way that we think, we are definitely not racist. Obviously, we say all South Africans are Africans. All of us. White, brown, black, doesn't matter. We are all Africans. This is our country. We need a future in this South Africa for all our children, and we think we can do that if we sit around the table and find solutions. And Stephen earlier referred to the remark made earlier in the Sunday Times with regard to the fact that young black people are moving to the cities. There's an urbanization process. There's no idea of trying to get people to return to some peasant way, whatever that may be. But there's a need for effective black commercial farmers with white commercial farmers all producing food for us in South Africa.
Right, let me read some more SMSs. I'll bring in my other guests here. Somebody says, hi, land belongs to Africans. That's Sabelo Dlamini. Africans were growing their food before whites came. Sipo says, we need white farmers. They are committed and they are patriotic as well. There's an SMS. The ANC government should either educate Dr. Mulder soonest or fire him from cabinet in 2012 during ANC centenary year. That's Sam. Whose facts must we look at? That's according to Kosi Democracy, Maqethuga. Dr. Mulder, please explain to us then why was it necessary for the past regimes to pass the 1913 Land Act, Group Areas Act, etc. KB is asking that question. Another one from Kaya in Joburg says ANC are just puppets of these settlers and they will remain slaves of imperialists. There is an SMS as well that says, what difference does it make? The whites have been in America and Australia for less time than the whites in Africa. Should they leave? Another one says, why haven't the Red Indians claimed back America? Forum, why not just read out the actual speech instead of he said, she said? That's Mag. And I think we get the point of what exactly happened there. There's another one from Amina Durban. The arrogance and the entitlement of whites is what holds transformation back. Amina is in Durban. Khoi are not Bantu. San are not Bantu as well, says another SMS. Lucas says, we heard that the country is importing maize because they exported everything. The ANC fought for democracy, not land. That's blacks are landless. Angus and Platt, what about the Griqua? Lots of these questions here. Christy, do you want to say something for me as we wrap up?
Yes. Thanks, Xolani. Basically, I just want to bring us back to during history and just remind ourselves that the attempt to de-link the Western and the Northern Cape from the rest of South Africa is not a new thing. In fact, during the negotiations in the early 1990s, there was a faction within the National Party that proposed exactly that kind of thinking. Interestingly, and I don't think it's a coincidence, the Freedom Front proposed falls exactly also in this area. And I'd also like to remind listeners that the Freedom Front Plus does not represent Afrikaners as a group, etc., etc. The Freedom Front Plus has 0.83% of the vote. That's 147,000 votes. So, and they represent a particular strand within Afrikaner nationalism that you can trace back. It emerged most strongly in the 1960s onwards. So that's when we talk about the Freedom Front Plus, and I think it's good to position them in current history.
Okay.
That's what one is actually talking about. Much more importantly, the fact of the matter is we have not really spoken today about redistribution of land and restitution of land. And the fact of the matter is the willing buyer, willing seller format is not working. It's definitely not working. And we have not found a creative way as South Africans, all of the people who live in this country, to actually deal with this.
Okay. You know what? Maybe that's our next assignment.
White people have a particular responsibility in this regard. It's not just a thing to say, well, we all have a claim on the land. That's not true. The fact of the matter is black people were dispossessed of their land, and white people have got a particular responsibility to engage creatively with how do we address the issue of dispossession
Christy,
of land.
it's our next assignment. We're going to have to look at that, definitely. Steve, just give me very briefly your closing comments.
Well, in conclusion, I think the sort of things that we had, 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 the sort of